She had been watching her son limp for 3 months. She had kept a notebook, dates, symptoms, how long the pain lasted, which leg, what made it better, what didn't. She brought the notebook to the appointment. She had a nursing background. She knew what she was looking at was not nothing. She knew the difference between a child who is tired from playing and a child who is tired in a different way, a deeper way, a way that doesn't resolve with sleep. And then a man with 22 years of credentials on his wall looked at her notebook, looked at her face, and wrote in the official record that her concern was likely in her own head. What Dr. Preston Hartley did not know, what no one in that Atlanta clinic knew, was that the woman he had just dismissed was about to call someone she loved, and that someone was about to call someone he knew, and that the person he knew was Shaquille O'Neal. What happened next was not reported to a licensing board. It was not posted online. It was a phone call to one of the finest pediatric physicians in the Southeast, and then a half-day session in a conference room in Atlanta that changed the way a doctor listened and saved the lives of children he had not yet met. This is the story of Kofi Osei-Bonsu, 7 years old, and the adults who did not stop until someone heard them. Lakewood Specialty Pediatrics occupied the second floor of a medical building in Buckhead, Atlanta, the kind of building with valet parking validation and a lobby waterfall and art on the walls that had been selected to communicate calm. The waiting room had noise-canceling headphones available at the front desk and a children's corner with wooden puzzles and a small library of picture books with their spines facing out in alphabetical order. Everything about the space communicated, "We are serious here. We are careful. You are in the right place." Amara Osei-Bonsu had driven 40 minutes from her home in Decatur to get there. With Kofi in the back seat listening to something on his headphones and leaning his head against the window the way he had been doing lately. A particular kind of quiet that was not his natural quiet, that was the quiet of a child conserving something. She had waited 6 weeks for this appointment. She had a Navy notebook in her bag. 91 days of observations, dates, times, which leg, duration of pain episodes, temperature readings, energy levels on a scale she had invented and explained to Kofi using dinosaurs as reference points. The observations were precise and consistent, and told a story that she could see clearly, and that she needed someone with the right credentials to see clearly too, and confirm, so that the people around her would stop saying growing pains in the tone of voice that meant you are a worried mother, and worried mothers exaggerate. She was not exaggerating. She had worked as a nursing assistant for 4 years in her 20s, before she and Deshaun moved to Atlanta and she shifted to full-time parenting and part-time bookkeeping. 4 years was not a medical degree. She knew that. But 4 years in a clinical environment teaches you the difference between a patient whose symptoms have a simple explanation and a patient whose symptoms are trying to say something that requires a different kind of listening to hear. Kofi's symptoms were the second kind. She was certain of this in the way that certain things do not require defending. They simply are. Dr. Preston Hartley entered the examination room 11 minutes after the nurse finished intake. He was 51 years old, lean with close-cut gray at his temples and the efficient manner of a man whose days were organized to the quarter hour. His wall held a medical degree from Emory, a residency certificate from Children's National in Washington, board certifications in 3 subspecialties, and a framed photograph of a youth soccer team he had coached in 2009, the year his clinic reached its 1,000th patient. He shook Amara's hand. He crouched to Kofi's eye level and said hello in the practiced warm voice of a man who has learned that 30 seconds of attention to a child makes the remainder of the appointment easier. He was not a bad man. He was a man who had seen the same things many times, and had, over many years, built a framework around those repetitions that was efficient and accurate, and that had, over time, become slightly more efficient than it was accurate. He reviewed the intake form. He looked at the notebook Amara set on the examination table between them with the particular glance of a physician who has learned to categorize the notebooks of anxious parents before reading them as data, yes, but data produced by a lay observer, filtered through the specific distortion of maternal concern, weighted accordingly. He examined Kofi's legs. He palpated the joints. He tested range of motion and found it normal. He asked Kofi where it hurt, and Kofi said sometimes his knees and sometimes his ankles, and sometimes both and sometimes neither. He noted this. He asked Amara how long the symptoms had been present. 91 days, she said. It's in the notebook. He nodded. He did not open the notebook. At Kofi's age, he said, in the measured patient tone of someone about to deliver a conclusion they have delivered many times before, intermittent joint pain is extremely common. The bones are growing. The muscles and tendons are adapting. We call it growing pains. It's an informal term, but it describes a real and normal phenomenon. He's also running low-grade fevers, Amara said. 103 nights. Not always, but regularly. Children run fevers, especially in school environments. I've been tracking them for 3 months. They correlate with the pain episodes. Dr. Hartley looked at her over his reading glasses. I understand you're worried, he said. That's completely natural. I've been doing this for 22 years. And I can tell you that the presentation you're describing is consistent with normal growth-related discomfort. I don't think we need to escalate at this point. I'd like blood work, Amara said. Her voice was level. I'd like inflammatory markers checked. CRP, ESRA, and a panel. There was a brief silence. Those are fairly involved tests for a child presenting with what we're seeing here, Hartley said. I don't want to put Kofi through unnecessary procedures. He's already in pain, Amara said. Unnecessary is a word I'd like to revisit. The appointment ended 7 minutes early. Hartley recommended following up with the regular pediatrician if symptoms persisted. He did not order blood work. He wished them both well. The appointment notes, finalized at 3:47 that afternoon, included the following line: Mother appears anxious. Symptoms reported by parent may reflect psychosomatic overlay. Conservative watchful waiting recommended. Amara did not see the notes until that evening, when the patient portal updated. She read the line twice. She put her phone face down on the kitchen counter. She did not say anything to Kofi, who was at the table eating cereal and watching something on a tablet. She waited until he was in bed. Then she called Deshaun, who was in Orlando for work, and she told him exactly what had happened, sentence by sentence. And her voice was steady the entire time, because she had learned, in the particular education of being a black woman in a medical setting, with a concern that a professional had decided was not a concern, that steadiness is the only register anyone takes seriously. Deshaun listened without interrupting. Then he said, "Let me make a call." What Dr. Preston Hartley did not know, what nobody at Lakewood Specialty Pediatrics knew on that Tuesday evening, was that Deshaun Osei was the nephew of Shaquille O'Neal, and that Shaquille O'Neal sat on the board of the Children's Healthcare of Atlanta Foundation, and that the pediatric research wing appointment, Dr. Hartley had been hoping for, had been sitting under review for 18 months, and that none of this was the reason Shaq was about to act. He was about to act because a 7-year-old boy was limping. But before we get to that call, you need to understand who Amara Osei Bonsu is, and what it costs to sit in a room where someone with credentials has decided your knowledge about your own child is a symptom of your anxiety rather than evidence of their illness. Amara was born in Accra, Ghana, in 1990, the second of 4 children in a family that came to the United States in 1997. When her father was offered a position teaching civil engineering at Georgia Tech, they settled in Stone Mountain. Her father was a man of complete and structured precision, the kind of person who believed that if you observed something carefully enough and documented it honestly enough, the truth of it would eventually become undeniable to anyone willing to look. He had passed this belief to Amara the way most important things are passed between parents and children, not through instruction, but through the daily example of watching someone live by it. She had wanted to be a doctor. She had started pre-med at Georgia State, and meant every bit of it. Worked nights at a hospital in Midtown to cover the gap between her scholarship and her actual costs. Slept 5 hours on the nights she had early labs, and did not complain about it, because her father was a man who had crossed an ocean for a teaching position, and she was not going to be the person in the family who complained about a commute. She made it through 2 years of pre-med, and had begun thinking seriously about her MCAT timeline when her mother's diagnosis arrived. Breast cancer. Caught late, because her mother was a woman who did not like to trouble anyone with her own body's news, who mentioned the lump at a family dinner as if it were a minor item on an agenda. The treatment protocol required someone to be at the house during the week, during the hours when her father taught and her siblings were too far away. And Amara was the one who was close, and the one who rearranged herself to be closer. She told herself it was temporary. She believed it was temporary. But a year of treatment became 18 months, and 18 months became her mother in remission but fragile, and fragile became a new normal that her family built around without naming it as such. And by the time Amara looked up at the path she had been on, it was 2 years behind her, and closing the gap felt less possible than it had before. She pivoted to nursing, got her CNA certification in 14 months, worked 4 years in clinical settings, 2 at a long-term care facility in Clarkston, 2 at an outpatient surgical center in Sandy Springs, and was good enough at the work that 2 different supervising nurses told her, independently, in different years, that she should go back and get her earn. She filed the application once. She did not submit it. She did not examine why for a long time, and when she did she found the answer was not that she lacked the ability, but that she had learned, in 4 years of clinical work, that the distance between what a caregiver can see and what a system is organized to hear is sometimes very large, and she was not sure she wanted to spend a career inside that distance. She met Deshawn when she was 26, at a birthday party for a mutual friend, where they argued companionably for 45 minutes about whether Atlanta had good public transit, before realizing they agreed on all the important points. She left clinical work when Kofi was born. She did not think of this as a loss. She thought of it as a transfer. The same skills applied to a different patient population, specifically one patient who needed them more specifically than any roster she had ever been assigned. She kept the notebook because her father had taught her that observation documented honestly is the beginning of the truth becoming undeniable. He had said this first, in reference to a load-bearing calculation. But she had understood immediately that it applied to everything. She had 91 days of the truth. She needed one person with the right credentials to look at it without deciding in advance what it meant. Deshawn called Shaq at 9:18 that night. He did not give context gradually. He told Shaq what had happened from the beginning, the 3 months, the notebook, the appointment, the 7 minutes cut short, and then the appointment notes. He read the line aloud. Mother appears anxious. Symptoms reported by parent may reflect psychosomatic overlay. The line sat on the phone between them. Shaq said nothing for a moment. Then he said, "Read it again." Deshawn read it again. Shaq was quiet. Not the quiet of a man managing his anger. The quiet of a man who has moved past anger into something more deliberate. The specific stillness of someone who has decided what needs to happen and is calculating how to make it happen correctly. He thought about Amara, driving 40 minutes with a notebook and 91 days of observations. He thought about a physician looking at that notebook without opening it. He thought about the word psychosomatic and the particular brutality of using a clinical term to tell a mother that the thing she knows is not real. He thought about Kofi, 7 years old, leaning his head against a car window. He thought about what it means to advocate for a child in a room where you have been pre-categorized as the kind of person who overestimates symptoms. To bring data and be told the data is a symptom. To say I'd like blood work and be told that what Kofi was already experiencing was the unnecessary thing. "Okay," Shaq said. "Okay, what?" Deshawn said. "I'm going to make a call," Shaq said. "Tell Amara to keep the notebook. Every day. Don't throw anything away." He hung up and sat for a while. He had been on the board of the Children's Healthcare of Atlanta Foundation for 4 years. In that time, he had learned the institution the way he learned things that mattered to him, specifically, with attention to the people rather than the structure. He knew the department heads. He knew the researchers. He knew who was excellent and what excellence looked like in a pediatric clinical setting. Because he had asked those questions and listened carefully when people who knew answered them. He knew Dr. Viviana Kebby. She was 48 years old, the chief of pediatric rheumatology at Children's Healthcare. a woman who had trained at Johns Hopkins and done her fellowship in London, and who had come back to Atlanta, because Atlanta was where she was from, and she believed that the best medical care should exist where the people who needed it most actually lived. She had published 47 peer-reviewed papers. She had a waiting list 14 weeks long. She answered her own emails, which Shaq had noted the first time he wrote to her, and she replied within the hour with 3 questions that told him she had read what he sent with complete attention. He called her at 9:41 p.m. She answered on the 3rd ring. "Dr. Achebe," he said, "I need to ask you something, and I want to be clear that this is personal, not foundation business." "Tell me," she said. He told her about Kofi. He told her about the 3 months, the notebook, the appointment, the 7 minutes, the blood work that was not ordered. He read her the line from the appointment notes. There was a pause on her end. "How old is the child?" She said. 7. "How long has the joint pain been intermittent versus continuous?" "Intermittent, 91 days documented. Bilateral or unilateral?" "Alternating, sometimes both." "And the mother's clinical background?" 4 years as a Sienna. Another pause. "Have them come in Tuesday morning," Doc Achebe said. "First appointment. I'll see him myself." Kofi sat in the examination room at Children's Healthcare of Atlanta on a Tuesday morning in March and answered Dr. Achebe's questions with the serious, precise manner of a child who has been asked about his body enough times that he has learned to observe it carefully and report accurately. She spent 41 minutes with him. She read the notebook, all of it, from the first entry, while Amara watched her read it. She ordered an ANA panel, a CARPI, an ESSER, a CBC, and a ferritin level. The results came back Thursday. Juvenile idiopathic arthritis, a condition that is genuinely difficult to diagnose. It presents with intermittent joint pain, fatigue, and low-grade fevers that overlap with dozens of common childhood conditions. It is frequently missed. It responds extremely well to early treatment. Amara sat in Dr. Achebe's office and heard the diagnosis and asked every question she had been preparing for 3 months. Dr. Achebe answered each one completely, with the specific patience of a person who understands that a diagnosis is not a destination, but the beginning of a different kind of work, and who wants the family in front of her to understand it the same way. Before they left, Amara said, "I had a notebook." "Dr. Achebe said, "I know. You were right." Dr. Vivienne Achebe did not call the Lakewood Clinic to report what had been missed. She did not write a letter to the medical board. She did not post anything publicly. She did something more lasting. 6 weeks after Kofi's diagnosis, she contacted Lakewood Specialty Pediatrics and offered to run a half-day continuing medical education session on pediatric rheumatological presentations that are frequently misattributed to orthopedic causes or dismissed as psychosomatic. She named no names. She referenced no specific cases. She said simply that she had seen a pattern in referrals and thought the material might be useful. 14 physicians attended. Dr. Preston Hartley sat in the 3rd row. She opened with epidemiology. She moved through differential diagnosis. She spent 20 minutes on the specific challenge of juvenile idiopathic arthritis, its intermittent presentation, its overlap with growth-related symptoms, the specific inflammatory markers that make the difference between a diagnosis and a missed opportunity. She presented a case study. Anonymized, a 7-year-old child with 91 days of documented intermittent joint pain, fatigue correlating with fever episodes, and a parent with clinical background who had specifically requested inflammatory blood work at the first specialist appointment. The blood work had not been ordered. The case study described what happened when a second physician saw the child. It described the diagnosis. It described the treatment timeline. It described what the child looked like 6 weeks into treatment. Hartley sat very still in the 3rd row. He had read his own notes many times since the foundation office had called Lakewood, not to request anything, just to confirm that a patient named Kofi Osei-Bonsu had been seen by a Dr. Achebe at Children's Healthcare. He had read the notes and understood, with the particular clarity that arrives when you are looking for something you hoped wasn't there, that he had written the word psychosomatic about a mother who had been correct. He looked at the case study. He listened to the rest of the session. At the end, Dr. Akebe set down her presentation notes and looked at the room. "I want to close with something that is not in the literature," she said. "It is something I have learned in 22 years of seeing children that their other doctors have not been able to help." She paused. "The most dangerous thing a physician can document is that a mother is anxious. Because in 22 years I have never met a mother who was wrong about her child." The room was quiet. Hartley requested a one-on-one meeting with her the following week. He did not explain why in the request. She agreed anyway, because she had been expecting it. In the meeting, he told her he believed he had missed something he should not have missed, and he asked her what she would have done differently from the first appointment. She told him, specifically and without softening it, what she would have done differently from the first appointment. He wrote it down. He asked 2 follow-up questions that told her he had understood what she said. She answered them. That afternoon, he returned to his clinic and reviewed the files of 6 patients in his current caseload, for whom he had deferred inflammatory blood work. He ordered it on all 6. 2 of those patients came back with findings that required further evaluation. One of them was 8 years old and had been presenting with joint pain for 4 months. He called that family himself. Lakewood Specialty Pediatrics adopted a new intake protocol the following quarter, a standardized rheumatological screening checklist for patients presenting with persistent musculoskeletal symptoms, co-developed with Dr. Ashebi's team, and administered at the first appointment, before the physician entered the room. It took 3 minutes to complete. It had already, by the time the year ended, flagged 4 patients who were referred for rheumatological evaluation. 2 received diagnoses that changed their treatment trajectory. Kofi Osei Bonsu turned 8 in July. By then, he had been on a treatment plan for 4 months, and his inflammatory markers were trending toward normal, and on a Saturday morning in August, he played in his first youth soccer game of the season, which he did not especially distinguish himself in from a technical standpoint, but which he completed without limping. Amara watched from the sideline with Deshawn. She had the notebook in her bag, not because she needed it anymore, but because she was not ready to put it away. It was 91 days of the truth, documented honestly, and it had eventually become undeniable to someone willing to look. Her father would have approved of that. She had framed 1 page from the children's healthcare appointment summary and hung it in the hallway of their home. Not the diagnosis page. The first page, which said, in the top right field where the referring party was noted, referred by family advocate. She walked past it every morning. Now I want to hear from you. Where are you watching from right now? Drop your city and country in the comments. I love seeing how far these stories travel. If this story moved you, even just a little, hit that like button. It takes 1 second, but it helps more people find stories like this one. And if you haven't already, subscribe to the channel and tap that bell so you never miss another video. But here's the most important thing I'll ask you today. Share this video. Send it to your mom. Send it to someone who needs to hear that when a mother says something is wrong, and the right doctor, in the right room, will always know the difference. Because kindness is free, and sharing it costs nothing. Thank you for watching. I'll see you in the next one.